there will come times in our lives as Christians where we need to just survey and analyze our situations. Sometimes we really need to look at things for what they are instead of what you want them to be. And in these cases, if you want to make a change, pray. Let God move in your life and be willing to do the work. Then we could be like Nehemiah, the captive cupbearer who built a nation. It's the Deek, it's the Deek, it's the Deek, yeah. It's the Deek, it's the Deek, it's the Deek, yeah. It's the Deek, it's the Deek, it's the Deek, yeah. It's the Deek. Welcome. To another edition of Sunday School with the Deek. I'm Deacon Wallace Hill IV, proud member of the Mount Pisgah Missionary Baptist Church, where my father, Wallace Hill III, is the pastor. Now it's an honor to have you take the time out of your week with me to do the Sunday School lessons that are based on the International Lesson Series. And for those of you that are new, do me a favor. Hit the subscribe button at the bottom of the page. Then click that little bell right next to it, and each week you'll be notified, ding, 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 the Deek has uploaded another lesson. Now the goal of Sunday School with the Deek is to bring the Word of God to life in your life, and to give you an understanding of the Scriptures and make the Word of God real and interesting and an integral part of your day-to-day being. Ultimately, I would hope that these lessons will inspire those who don't have a relationship with Christ to ask, what must I do to be saved? Now, I want to give a couple of shout outs real quick before I start the lesson. I always like to take a moment to memorialize or celebrate those who are big supporters of Sunday School with the Deek. My cousin Reggie Mills, he lost his mom last week after her battling several years with illness. Reggie has shared with me many times that these Sunday School lessons have helped him through his rough times. And I just want to tell you, Reggie, that I love you and that I'm praying for you and that we're all mourning with you as we celebrate the life of Mama T. She is now roller skating in that heavenly roller rink in the sky. So be strong, Reggie. Remember, God has never made a mistake, and He'll surely see you through this as He did when you lost your wife, my cousin Phyllis. Secondly, I want to shout out to my brother Daryl Hill. Many of you might not know that Deek had a brother, but he's a huge supporter of Sunday School with the Deek. He says he watches all the time while he's on the treadmill, and I just want to sincerely thank him for his support. It means the world to me, bro, that you would take the time to listen to your brother. It's nice to know that the Deek is part of you staying healthy as well and helping you to shed a few pounds. And to all of you others, let me know if you're out there. I love to shout people out. So anyway, let's get into what you came here for. Today we continue in our quarter where we're dealing with prophets of restoration. And here you'll find that there's a common theme with these lessons where all the prophets we're studying are playing an integral role in restoring something, whether it's restoring lives or cities or nations. And this week we deal with the prophet Nehemiah. Nehemiah is pretty similar to Ezra from last week. Ezra went back to help his people in Jerusalem. And when he got there, he saw that they were committing the same sins that got them in trouble in the first place by disobeying God and taking on foreign wives. Well, Nehemiah comes about 15 years after Ezra. And then you need to recognize that it's almost been 100 years since they were let out of captivity. And they still hadn't rebuilt their city. The temple has been rebuilt, but the city and the gates surrounding it are still in shambles. Now, let's look a bit more on why Nehemiah and Ezra were similar yet different. If you read Nehemiah 1:1, it gives you the impression that Nehemiah is the writer of this text. It says, the words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. And it came to pass the month of Chislev, the 20th year, as I was in Shushan the palace. Notice where it says, I was in Shushan the palace. But it's believed that Ezra is the writer of this book. Now, we do know the same writer wrote both Ezra and Nehemiah. And the original Hebrew text is one book. It's Ezra, Nehemiah. But as you can see from the first 1:1, that it's written in the first person sometimes. So it's believed that the author kind of takes many of the writings of Nehemiah to complete this book. So there was a notable difference. Nehemiah was just a layman. Ezra was a priest. If you look at the book of Nehemiah, the emphasis was on rebuilding the gates and the walls of the city. It wasn't so much dealing with the sin of the people. And so Nehemiah was the king's cupbearer. Now what does that mean? That means that anything the king ate or drank had to be tested by Nehemiah first. And I wonder how much that job paid. But anyway, it was to make sure that nobody was trying to poison the king. So Nehemiah would taste it first. And, there was one problem with Nehemiah. His heart was with his people back in Jerusalem. Ezra, if you look at Ezra, he returned about 94 years after they got out of captivity. And Nehemiah went about 13, 15 years after that. And so, now that you got a little bit of background on who Nehemiah was, and why him and Ezra are kind of separate, similar yet different, let's get a closer look at the events leading up to today's lesson. In chapter 1, Nehemiah gets a report from one of his friends of how things were going back in Jerusalem and rebuilding the city. Look at Nehemiah 1:3. It says, and they said unto me, the remnant that are left at of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Now this was rough news for Nehemiah to hear, and he did what we should all do when we get bad news, or we in heartache, or we in need. He took the prayer. Remember last week, Ezra took the prayer when he found out what was going on, and his prayer was so powerful that it changed the whole nation. He was wailing and crying and praying to God like never before. And by the end of his prayer, everybody in the nation was about praying, on the ground crying and asking God for forgiveness. So prayer changes things, y'all. Nehemiah knew what was going on back in Jerusalem, how they weren't getting things done, and he took to prayer. And look, when he gets word of this, look what it says in the very next verse. It says, and it came to pass when I heard these words, that I sat down and wept and mourned certain days and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. And so after that, the whole entire chapter 1 is just Nehemiah praying. So then our lesson starts in chapter 2, but our lesson doesn't start until verse 11. So let's read what happened in the first 10 verses, and then we'll get into the lesson. It says, verse 1, from the New Living Translation. Early in the following spring, in the month of Nisan, during the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine. I had never before appeared sad in his presence. So the king asked me, why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled. Then I was terrified. But I replied, long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. The king asked me, well, how can I help you? With a prayer to the God of heaven, I replied, if it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried. The king with the queen sitting beside him, asked, "How long will you be gone? When will you return?" After I told him how long I would be gone, the king agreed to my request. I also said to the king, "If it please the king, let me have letters addressed to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah. And please give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber. I will need it to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, for the city walls, and for a house for myself." And the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on me. When I came to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates, I delivered the king's letters to them. The king, I should add, had sent along army officers and horsemen to protect me. But when Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, the Ammonite official, heard of my arrival, they were very displeased that someone had come to help the people of Israel. And this is where our lesson begins. Let us jump into the lesson. Today we're in the book of Nehemiah, chapter 2, verses 11 through 20. Our lesson date is Sunday, April 18th, 2021. Our lesson is entitled Nehemiah, the captive cupbearer builds a nation. Grab your Bibles, grab your books, grab your pens, grab your paper, and let's get into today's lesson. Verse 11. So I came to Jerusalem and I was there 3 days. So once he arrived, and before he conducted any business, he rested from his trip. He didn't tell anybody that he was there. Now, if you go to Ezra, the book of Ezra, chapter 8, verse 32, you'll see that Ezra did the exact same thing when he arrived from here from his long trip. But we do need to remember Nehemiah did roll into town with a military escort and lumber from the king of Persia. Nehemiah came to Jerusalem full of heart, full of prayer, full of faith, full of wisdom, full of big vision, full of support from the king. And he finally gets to his destination, and what does he do? He did nothing for 3 days. This tells me that even when you write, even then when you got permission to do stuff, even when you have God's permission, sometimes we need to be patient and do it on God's timing, not ours. Let's go to verse 12. And I arose in the night, and I, for some few men with me, neither told I any man that what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem, neither was there any beast with me, save the beast that I rode upon. And I arose in the night, and I and some few men with me. So after he spent 3 days resting, he's now prepared to get started on what he came here to do. He got up at night. He only took a few men with him. This was done to keep everything a secret. He didn't want anybody knowing why he was there and what he had planned. He kept his circle tight, y'all, because when people find out your plans, you open yourself up to schemes to stop you or discourage your plans. People are a trip. And I say this every week. And I'm talking about people of God, People will try to discourage you from accomplishing things, even if in the end they will benefit as well. It's something about jealousy that lies in all of us that makes us measure ourselves when we look at others and their achievements and their accomplishments. We should all celebrate as brothers and sisters when one of us accomplishes something. Or when we see dreams being fulfilled, or new cars being bought, or new houses being built, or engagements, or marriages, but the devil will make us look at them and then measure ourselves by what we think they are accomplishing, and then get jealous when we don't think that we are in the same place that they are. Nehemiah knew this, and he kept his circle tight. He went out at night and he only took a few people with him. Look at the next part. It says, he neither told any man what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. So, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes we can't go telling everybody our dreams or our plans. Sometimes you just need to be quiet. You don't have to take to Facebook every single move of your life every day. You know, successful people move in silence. You know, they make moves behind the scenes. So when you blab everything out to everybody, people will beat you to the punch sometimes. My pastor talks about a car that he had planned to buy when he was a teenager. And then, you know, he went to the dealership the next day to put the deposit down. And his friend that was with him when he saw the car had went back and beat him putting the deposit down. And so he got the car over my pastor. So sometimes it's best to keep our mouth shut in order to achieve the results that we're looking for. So people will steal your plans, people will steal your ideas, and sometimes it's best just not to tell anybody your plans. So if you want to serve God, go and do it. And then let other people find out afterwards. And if you think about it, you don't even tell nobody what you're doing. And to be honest, there's no need to be retelling people what you did. You know, sometimes, many times God will withdraw himself when we boast about things that we have done. You know. So anyway, neither was there a beast with me, save for the one I rode on. He didn't take any animals with him. He didn't want to make any noise. Blah, blah, blah. Let's go to verse 13. And I went out by night by the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well and the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates therefore were consumed by fire. And he says he went out by night by the gate of the valley. And really this is where the gate of the valley used to be, because now it's burned down. But then from there he went by the dragon well, and from there he went to the dung port. Now, why he included this in places that he looked, I do not know. But this is the port in which they used to transfer all the dung out of the city. It says, and he viewed the walls of Jerusalem. He went out to see what condition these walls were in. You know, this word view that's used here is a medical term for like probing, or like probing a wound, or trying to see the extent of the damage. So he wanted to see what he was going to have to do. Was he going to have to knock down some walls? Could he use some of the walls that were remaining? Were there some still standing? He needed to understand what he would need to do to begin building. And, I heard a saying once that says, good work will be well done when it is first well considered. So it looks like here Nehemiah is taken to check out the situation to see how much work is going to need to be done. He needed to take a look at it because, this whole place had been consumed with fire. And so for the first time, Nehemiah is getting to see it with his own eyes. He's heard all about it. But now he gets to see what God has sent him to repair. So you might say, well, how did he see all this? It was at night. It was probably a well-lit moon, full moon or something, because they didn't take torches, they didn't take lamps, because then they would have been found out. They would have been saw or seen. Whew. Anyway, it's 9 o'clock on Thursday night, y'all. When I'm doing this, I'm tired. But hey, we got to get this done. So verse 14. Then I went on to the gate of the fountain and to the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. So he went to the gate of the fountain, and then he went to the king's pool, but he couldn't go any further because the animal he was riding couldn't get through there. So let's go to verse 15. Then went I up in the night by the brook, and viewed the wall, and turned back and entered by the gate of the valley, and so returned. So it says, then I went up in the night by the brook. So once he couldn't get through to the king's pool because his beast couldn't get through there, Even though it was still dark, he went up by the brook called Kidron to go and view the demolished walls of the city. And from there he turned back and went back to the place that he was staying. He went back the same way that he came. Verse 16. And the rulers knew not whither I went or what I did. Neither had I as yet told it to the Jews, nor to the priests, nor to the nobles, nor to the rulers, nor to the rest that did the work. So it says the rulers, that nobody knew what he was there for. Everybody didn't have a clue what he was there for. And so this goes for everybody. People who had been appointed by the king of Persia, and also the rulers and the people of Jerusalem. Nobody knew what he had came there for. Let's go to verse 17. Then said I unto them, ye see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. He said, then I said unto them, he's talking about the priests and the princes and all the Jewish people. He said, you see the distress that we are in? He's talking about how they're just vulnerable, how they're just exposed to their enemies because they don't have a wall built around their city. You know, sometimes we don't even notice the distress that we're in because we've been in it so long. He tells them, look at the distress that we're in. He owns the problem, even though he just got there 3 days ago. He knows that this has been a 100-year-old problem for them. You know, and people had just begun to accept this is how it's going to be. Nehemiah wasn't going to be one of them. And sometimes we need a Nehemiah in our lives to say, you don't have to live like this. God wants better for you. See how Jerusalem lieth in waste because the gates have been burned down. That's what he just said to them. Now, what was not in our lesson is that Nehemiah had been given a report about this in Nehemiah 1 and 3. And I had read that right at the beginning of the lesson. But when Nehemiah got there, he went to find out for himself what damage had been done, right? So he's now sharing with all the priests and all the princesses the plan that God had put on his heart. He says, come, let us build up the walls of Jerusalem. Now, look at how Nehemiah is still saying us. He said, let us build up the walls of Jerusalem. You know, don't be that person who just sits there and start pointing out everything that's wrong without offering any kind of help to fix it. No, any kind of advice on how to fix it. Nehemiah knew that if God could move on the heart of a pagan king to help support building the city, then he surely should be able to move on the hearts of the people. Look at what he says. That we be no more reproach. Now, this really was not about brick and mortar. It wasn't all about truly building up these walls. It was about getting rid of the shame, getting rid of the fear, getting rid of the poverty and the insecurity of these people. He's saying this because, you know, all the surrounding nations are making fun of them. You know, they used to be a mighty nation, and now they're scoffing at them because they're such a defenseless people. People love to see the mighty taken down. We all do. You know, this was once a proud nation, and now it's in ruins. So outsiders, you know, would frequently come in and rob them of what they had, or what little they had, and destroy any progress that they may be making in rebuilding the city. And Nehemiah was determined to fix this with God's help. Let's go to verse 18. Then I told them of the land of my God, which was good upon me, as also the king's words that he had spoken unto me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. Then I said unto them, of the hand of my God, which is good upon me. Now Nehemiah lets the people know that this wasn't his project. This was God's project, right? If people get a sense that that this is your vision or it's really all about you and raising you up to look good, then they most likely are less likely to get on board. But he begins to tell them how God has blessed him while he was working in the king's court, how he was the king's cupbearer, and how God allowed him to see favor in the eyes of King Artaxerxes, and allowed him the opportunity to share his sadness with them, and then God touched King Artaxerxes' heart to let him do something about it. You know, I have so many people who tell me who God has given them favor, you know, and so people, you know, people who talk to me all the time, and I'm telling you, God will show you favor in the midst of your storm if you just hold on to his unchanging hands and be who he wants you to be. That's the part that most people leave out when they're trying to, you know, fill up a church or, you know, do whatever. You know, we don't get favor by being a Christian. You know, we have to uphold our end of the deal too. Nehemiah loved God and he loved his people. Nehemiah is not of royal bloodline. You know, he's not an elected official. Nehemiah was an average Joe Schmo who was blessed to get a job as the king's cupbearer. And then God showed him favor. You know, he says the hand of God was upon me. And, so here Nehemiah explains all the details to the people about his conversation with the king. And he shared them how the kings had given him letters to make sure he was safe as he was traveling, and then to give him money and timber to build. And when the people heard this, they had a whole new motivation. They said, "Let us rise up and build." So they strengthened their hands for this good work. They got excited. They got rejuvenated. You know, they were animated and encouraged to get going again. And they were really cheerful about trying to get this job done. And Nehemiah didn't have to coerce them. Nehemiah didn't have to, give them chicken dinners or rewards. He simply explained what God had called him to do, and they all followed. You shouldn't have to be paid or given rewards or something to do work for God. I said you shouldn't have to. And there's nothing wrong with getting paid for a job that you do for the church. But there's something wrong that if that's the only way you gonna do it. So it's kind of sad that it takes this outsider who haven't been there to come in and motivate the people to do what they all knew was needed. These people knew their walls needed to be rebuilt, but it took Nehemiah to come in and motivate them. Let's go to verse 19. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, they laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, "What is this thing that ye do? Will ye rebel against the king?" Well, just as in life, the same thing is in the Bible. Haters. When people who think less of you see you trying to elevate yourself or pull yourself up, they try to discourage you by hating on you. Here we have Sanballat the Horonite. He was from Horonian, which is a city in Moab, but he was a Jew. He lived in Samaria. Sanballat was connected. He had he was connected by marriage to some real priestly families. If you look at Nehemiah 13 and 28, it said his servant Tobiah was an Ammonite from the city of Rabbath Ammon in Jordan. He was a Jew too who was living in Samaria. He was a man of influence. If you look at Nehemiah 13 and 4. And then you have Geshem the Arabian, who was actually a governor of some other place near Judea. So they see Nehemiah leading the charge to rebuild the city and the walls, and then they start to laugh. Look at what he says when they heard it. They laughed us to scorn. They laughed at them because they didn't think they were capable of doing it. You know how people laugh down at you? You know, almost like, yeah, right. Yeah, right. Instead, you know, they understood that it has almost been 100 years since these Jews were let out of captivity, and the city is still not rebuilt. So now you can understand why Nehemiah was sad. Now look at how long they've been trying to rebuild this city. And now you can surely understand why Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem all laughed at these guys. They felt like Nehemiah was the new flavor of the month. You know, first was Zerubbabel in 538 BC. He came first. Then Ezra came in 458 BC. And now we have this Nehemiah dude. You know, so they didn't have any respect for the people of God. But I want you to hone in on the word scorn. You know, I didn't want to blow past this. Scorn is that feeling that you get when you feel something is worthless. Scorn is what Sanballat and his crew felt about what Nehemiah was trying to do. But if you're not careful, it's a feeling that we can get when we're discouraged, you know, especially when we're doing the Lord's work. That feeling of, who am I kidding? This will never work. You know, I must be some kind of fool. You know, and one thing people have said to me about why they like watching Sunday School with the Deek is that, you know, I'm very real. In many cases, I'm learning right along with you. But I felt scorned many times. You know, I studied 10 hours for Sunday school. And I pull, you know, in the parking lot on Sunday morning, and I see 3 cars. And one of them belonged to my dad. You know, I put all this work in to Sunday School with the Deek, and no one hits the like button, no one, you know, or comments, and, you know, and I get low number of views or whatever. And I say, what's the point? Who am I kidding? No one really wants to know what thus says the Lord. You know, and so at some point, every Christian is going to be tested like this. So, you know, to pass the test, we got to constantly ask ourselves, whose opinion do you care more about? Man's or God's? And, you know, we can't ever get more concerned about what people say about us than what God requires of us. So they not only laughed at Nehemiah, but they added to it by saying, what is this thing ye do? You know, they didn't think that Nehemiah had the authority to even be coming here and doing this. And they said, what, you rebelling against the king? They're talking about King Artaxerxes. And they're thinking that they're going to be able to charge this guy with treason. But little did they know that the king is the very man that gave Nehemiah permission to come and do this. He gave him money, he gave him permission, he gave him manpower, and that's why he's able to do it. Let's go to verse 19, to our last verse, verse 20. Then answered I them, and said unto them, the God of heaven will prosper us. Therefore, we his servants will arise and build. But ye have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. Then he answered unto them, you know, Nehemiah gonna love this, because he now get to stand up and say, you know what? Y'all think I'm rebelling against the king? Well, the king is the one that gave me permission to do this. He said, the God of heaven will prosper us. Nehemiah took a page out of Isaiah, who wrote in Isaiah 54 and 17, almost 150 years before Nehemiah got here. No weapon formed against me shall prosper. But instead, the God that we serve will make us prosper. You know, Nehemiah could have pulled all these documents out and say, look, I'm legit. But, you know, when people don't want to believe you, it don't matter what you say or do. They would just say something like, oh, them documents fake or whatever. But he says God will make us prosper. He's giving God all the credit. God will serve, will protect us. God will supply our every need. You know, as long as we put him in the forefront and do his will and depend on him and not on ourselves, there's nothing that you plus God can't do. Therefore, we his servants will arise and build. He says, we don't care if you laugh at us. You can try to stop us. You can put roadblocks in front of us, but God got us. And the last part of the verse says, but you have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. Like, what do you care anyway? You don't live here. You ain't from here. You know you ain't got nothing here to preserve the memory of. You don't go to church here. Why do you even care if we build up these walls? Sometimes people don't even care, don't have nothing to do with what you're trying to do, and they still try to stop you. But if you read further in this book, you'll see that they had encounters with Sanballat and forget the other guy's name, the entire time that was in this book. But that didn't stop them. And God's work gets done, and they were proved completely wrong. Now this is the end of our lesson, but I just want to try to make some of these things a little relevant for today. You know, Nehemiah could have focused on what was right in Jerusalem, because they had a lot of things right. They were finally back out of exile. You know, the temple had been rebuilt. You know, they were back to sacrificing and worshiping and doing things like that. So they had a lot to be thankful for. But sometimes we need to look at what's wrong, and that's what Nehemiah did. You know, we fool ourselves sometimes if we only look at what is good. And, you know, some people had no trouble with this. You know, they always can find out what's wrong. You know, always got criticism. And but Nehemiah teaches us by example that first, you know, we got to first look at the broken down towers and walls in our lives and really carefully look at it, right? And if we have the heart, you know, if we have the prayer, we have the vision, you know, we can be used by God to fix this. And but it's hard to be used by God for those who only want to offer advice without really surveying the situation and truly understanding what's wrong. That's what Nehemiah did. He went and surveyed the area. But, you know, sometimes we might make the mistake of saying things are not as bad as they seem when they really are as bad as they seem. So, you know, it's super important for us to know the worst when you're trying to make a change for the better. And so the power of the Holy Spirit can be so effective in somebody like Nehemiah, who was, you know, bold enough to look at the situation, diagnose it, and then rise up to the task. You know, there's a lot of Christians that we know, all kinds of Christians, strong Christians, you know, joyful Christians. Some Christians growing in their relationship with God, but you can also see that some of us are figurative walls in our lives that are broken down. And you may be going through this. You may have gone through this. Some people are hurting. Some people are trapped in a cycle of, you know, sin, and we're looking for ways to get out of it. You know, I'm a witness. You know, I can say that, you know, God will build up broken down portions of your life. We just got to be willing to do the work. And so if we tour our life the same way Nehemiah took a tour of Jerusalem, then we might notice the broken pieces and the broken portions of the walls in our life. I'm going to leave you with this. Proverbs 25:28 says, "Whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls." And many of our lives are like a city with broken walls. You know, living with a constant sense of, you know, fear or whatever. You know, we shouldn't hide our eyes from these broken things. God can help you change them if you really want to. And yes, you may get some Sanballats that come in your life along the way hating on you as you try to make your change. But remember, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. And in the words of my good friend Patty Lewis, no means no. No weapon, whether it's made or formed or imagined, shall prosper. So be blessed. Here is our lesson. Our lesson for April 25th will be in the book of Lamentations, the entire 5th chapter. The lesson is entitled A Plea for Restoration. As I say every week, hit the subscribe button, comment or share. Your comments help me, and your sharing the lesson helps you plant a seed. Let's dismiss. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. Sunday School with Deek.